Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about communication and working with designers. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, communicating with designers has been the toughest part of the job for me, especially since my company seems to value them more than engineers. Sometimes they make passive aggressive statements like, you just implement the stuff we create. We actually have to create stuff from scratch. How do you deal with this? Well, I usually chuckle a little bit to myself, and I have a it was a long time since I have been in a company where this has been the case, and at the time I just really didn't like I lost all respect for that designer the same day. I mean, he was a nice guy and he was fairly good at what he did, but I could see in his eyes how like he had some serious self-esteem issues and a little bit of an ego, I suppose, because I never really understood why he felt the need to tell me that until I got a little bit older and I realized that I'm guessing that either it's an ego problem or he has such a sensation of inferiority that he has to go and make my day worse to make himself feel better. And the thing that I responded was that, well, I like to think about things like this. If you draw me a really nice box and tell me that if that box should turn whatever you put inside of it into gold, and then you ask me to build it, who has the tougher job? And I looked at him and I said, do you realize that although I may not be able to make something that is as beautiful as the UX that you like the designs that you make, I can literally I could sit down and start doing your job right now. You don't even know how to write a single line of code, and you talk to me as if that's not building something from scratch. So we got into this kind of argument over the whole thing, and I mean, this was years ago, and today I'm very happy to say that I have much more constructive ways of dealing with designers. But this became an argument, and you should know that this is not uncommon. It's not uncommon for there to be this weird rivalry between design and engineering. And like finally we came to I told them to kind of just make peace, that what you have to understand is that you do literally 10% of the work that is required in order to make this system and make it a shippable product. Now, the thing here is, which I think is very sad, that you think that those 10% are unimportant. They're not. They are among the most important 10% that we have. It's extremely important that we have a nice interface and a nice UX experience. And if we work together, we will make something amazing, and it's going to be much better than what we could possibly do individually. I have to do a lot more work because the process of actually implementing all of the designs that you have created takes a lot longer than designing the thing. And if you don't believe me, look at the hiring ratio. There's one of you, and I looked over to my software team, and there's 10 of us. Why do you think that is? So can we please drop this thing and just admit that we are both needed in order to actually produce results for the company? Otherwise we wouldn't have a job. Otherwise we wouldn't be here. And although that was a very immature argument back in the day, the same sentiment has held true for me. And today, when I get into a discussion with a designer, it's usually a much more constructive argument. I will tell them things like I have designers at my work today who have like they are mature people. They don't have any like complexes over the fact that one is more valuable than the other. They do their job and I do my job, and we're good at doing our jobs, and together we make amazing things happen. The argument usually starts when we have the inevitable battle between what the designer represents and what the engineer represents, and this is never going to go away. And if you want to be able to get a little bit of perspective on your role in this company, I want you to think about this. So the designer represents the ideal. always. That is their job. Their job is to deliver the perfect user experience, if at all possible. Now, that is a lot easier than it is to build the perfect user experience. Once again, the reason is very simple, because it takes longer to code a solution than it takes to make an artboard. That doesn't mean that making an artboard is easy, but it is much quicker. That, so far, every single designer I've ever worked with has agreed on that. Now, when it comes to building the thing, however, now we have a different sort of problem, because now we need to pull things into reality. We need to go from fantasy land to actual working solutions. This is where you come in, and you are destined as the developer at almost all the time, I'm very sorry to say, to be the negative Nancy. You're always going to have to be that person who lets the designer down or forces a compromise. You see, if the designer gets exactly what they want, remember, they don't actually know how to build a system. They have no idea. All they have is fantasy. That's all they have, and that's the only thing they're ever gonna have. So if you let them have whatever they want, you may actually end up with a really shitty system that doesn't actually perform to specification, or it doesn't actually do the thing it's supposed to be doing, or it does it in a very poor way. And they have no way of knowing that that is the case unless you tell them. And that's why you as the developer need to have a little bit of backbone. So as the subscriber is explaining, think about that. The designer is the ideal, the person who's trying to make this beautiful, amazing thing. They are involved in the concept phase. Who else is involved in the concept phase? Well, your PO and your boss and all the people with ideas. All of these people have their own little clique within practically every single company. Of course, they're going to have a better connection and better bond to each other. And of course, you're going to have to be that person who goes in and says, no, this is probably not going to work. But here's the kicker. If you come in and you say to your PO that these designs are not going to work for us, the designer is going to do, and they all do the same thing. They're going to get really defensive, usually, and go, well, why? What's wrong with it? Because they're very sensitive about the work that they do, and I will explain why they are. And then you say, well, because this is it's not technologically feasible, or it's going to add a lot of time, or there's going to be a lot of bugs, etc., etc. And they have no way of fighting you on this, because you are the expert. You're the person who has to pull all of this into reality, and you're the only one at the table who knows how to actually build this. In other words, if you argue correctly, if you have enough backbone and enough self-confidence to actually constructively formulate yourself and explain why these are problems, they will always have to fold, because no sane manager or PO or anybody like that is going to risk having a shitty system over having a good UX. Never. They're never going to try to risk that. So unless they literally question you to the point where they're practically telling you your job for you, they're not going to win. And usually what I see is that when the designer wins, it's usually because the developer is nice or folds or something like that. But I've never seen a developer lose an argument with a designer when the developer stood their ground. I've never seen it. They always win because of one very, very interesting thing, and that is that whenever the argument starts, the developer has actual facts. They can actually say that design is going to take 1 day, that design is going to take 2 weeks. They can tell that's hard information, hard data. The designer can only go, but it looks nicer. Usually, because even though they're supposed to be data driven, they don't actually they don't have the resources to do real user testing and stuff like that. So it's very, very rare that a designer comes prepared to a discussion with a developer about scope and so forth. Now, the thing about them being sensitive and having this type of, well, in some cases this very, well, I'm gonna say sensitive side, just remember that their job is a fucking ungrateful one in many cases. It's not fun to be a designer in some cases. Because remember, you as the software developer, you're the expert. You can practically say whatever you want. And your manager, they have no idea. They don't know anything about systems development. So unless you're saying something really out there, they're going to kind of believe you, and they're most likely going to let you do whatever you want as long as it meets their requirements. You are usually undisturbed, especially if you're a back-end developer. Not front-end developer, not so much. But that's where the designer has the same sort of problem as the front-end developer. It's easy to have an opinion about the UX or UI. If you talk to my designers, they will all tell you that it sucks that every single person thinks that they are a designer or a UX person, and it doesn't matter how amazing they design. They can make the most beautiful thing that you can imagine, put their heart and soul into that thing, and they will never get that past a PO or a stakeholder that doesn't want to cut stuff away or like kill their darlings and like mess the whole thing up. And they have no way of dealing with this. So as you can imagine, if you're constantly being criticized and questioned for every single little thing that you do, and you're at the same time in this very awkward position where you have this amazing mind that really understands graphic design and UX, and the other people don't, and you can't back up, you don't have any hard concrete data, you don't have any really good arguments as to why these other people, well, they're not really getting it. You can't formulate that in a nice way. You really, at the end of the day, only have the argument, it looks nicer or it's better UX or something like that. How often do you imagine? It's not a fun situation to be in. At least as a developer, people are afraid. Well, I'm not going to say afraid, but they're going to listen to you most of the time because they don't know. You're the expert, so they just default to that you are saying the thing that is correct. So what I want you to take away from this is that if you're dealing with designers who have a lot of opinions or like are putting you down or things like that, remember, they don't actually have any power. You think that they have power, and they act as if they have power, and if you ever want to know, question whether or not they have more power than you, ask yourself this: if you have a project, if you fire the designer, you lose the user experience. If you fire the developer, there is no company. There's nothing. Without the developer, nothing exists. That doesn't mean that you're not needed. Both of you are needed in order to ship the product so that you can actually make money from it. But don't let yourself be intimidated by the fact that they have a closer relationship with your manager, because your manager is gonna listen to you if you behave as a professional and if you get good at communication. So as I said, I have never seen a developer lose an argument with the designer when they stood their ground. The designer will almost always have to fold, because unless the PO is okay with that the scope changes or something is going to be a very tricky implementation, they're gonna force the designer to redo their work, and they might be pissy, and this is exhausting. I'm very sorry. I hate arguing with designers because it's exhausting. There's always a battle, but you're gonna have to fight that battle, because the fundamental problem is either they get exactly what they want, regardless of how unfeasible that is, and then you're gonna have to deal with maintaining that system. Remember that all the bugs and all the problems that come from that's on you, because as soon as the designer is done, it's very much like leaving, getting somebody pregnant and then just fucking off. That's exactly what they will do. They will give you the baby, and then they're gonna fuck off, and you're gonna have to take care of that thing for pretty much ever. So to avoid that, stand your ground, and remember, your voice is almost always going to win when you say one thing is going to take that amount of time and produce that amount of problems, and this thing here is much simpler, it's going to be much more stable, and you're going to be able to ship it in a fraction of the time. You're practically always going to win. Have a great day.